This is actually, congratulations on attempting this Herculean task. It's a bit of work. Some people have done it before. The actual process starts at the end of June and ends in October. So we've got some time here. This is new the last 2 years to have us do it this early. We'll do it again in June. Suppose when you really made the decision to go ahead and do this. But we thought it'd be better to do it right now. We're getting the things nominated. So it's essentially self-nominated by signing up. And you're, at least on the record, yes, you will help answer questions. It doesn't seem to be moving. So to some extent, we apologize. There's so much other junk on the screen, but it's the OWL software that's okay. So what is AIA Fellowship? This is a picture of last year's class. Class of fellows is usually something like 80 to 100 people who were fellowship this year.
Excuse me, the audio is absolutely terrible. It's probably not your fault, it's your room, but I can hardly hear anything, and I can just see that everybody's chat saying the same on the chat. Just
Okay.
so
It won't do much turning, right?
oh, that's better.
Okay, we just moved it from the middle of the room to my desk here, so I don't think, when the questions happen, you guys can kind of scooch over here. Speak loud. Okay, get rid of the bottom of the screen.
Yep, so make sure everybody's in. Yep. Okay, so that disappears.
Okay, so this is a group of fellows. This takes place at the June conference, which is now called AIA 24, Conference on Architecture and Design, where you would have the investiture if you're elevated to fellowship. And the main reason I'm just stopping here for a minute is because this year in particular is a good year to go, because next year the AIA conference will be in Boston. And it's very common to invite people to your investiture. It's free. As many of your partners and staff and family and friends can come as like. And so when it's in your hometown, it's really fun to bring people there. So this is a membership category. We're basically inviting people. This is about 3% of the membership of the AIA is recognized as a fellow. So it's relatively prestigious. It's a good thing to aspire to. It's a nice thing to have after your name. And it's a pretty rigorous process, both preparing your submission as well as the jury's processes. They go through the whole thing. What did you find out? Oh, you're clicking the actual arrow?
Yeah. Yep.
So the College of Fellows exists as an actual entity. It has its own board or council. It has an executive committee and a chancellor. And we focus on sharing sort of the camaraderie of fellows, sharing interests, but primarily promoting AIA goals and values, which are to advance the profession, to mentor young architects, and to serve society. We mentor young architects in several programs at the AIA and the College of Fellows operate together. And we work closely with the Young Architects Forum to develop mentoring programs. There's several mentoring programs in different parts of the country. We also, and it's not on this list, are trying to promote research So we engage in the Upjohn Fellowship, Upjohn grants, component grants, and we have the biannual Latrobe Fellowship, which gives I think $100,000 every 2 years now to promote grants. And we've had them in Boston for 2 of the last 4 years, so that's actually great. Right.
Left.
So you have to have been a member for 10 years. It used to be consecutive, but now it's as long as it was cumulative, if you've been a member for 10 years. If you don't know for sure if you're eligible, you can check either with the BSA here or with AIA membership at this address here. And if you want to download one of these yourself, you'll have some live links in here. So the first trick is assembling your team, and you need to be nominated, you need to have a sponsor, and you need reference writers. The sponsor is probably the most critical thing. Obviously, you can get nominated several ways. I think this book tells us in a minute. But the sponsor sort of holds your hand. They're responsible for organizing your reference, or we recommend you use them to organize your reference writers. And they are probably the best person they know you the most, and they're the best person to check back and forth as you write, whether you're hitting the strong points, what have you. The nominator can either be a component or a group of members. The jury no longer, either last year or this year, it's the first year, they don't see who nominated you. So you can either be nominated by the honors and awards group within your chapter, and we've given your names to honors and awards. So technically you're nominated. Or you can get you can be nominated by 10 other members or 5 other fellows. And this is kind of a compromise here with the small chapters who may or may not have that many fellows, but a lot of times the small chapters don't have an honors and awards committee either. So we're trying to get as many people getting into the group. We've tried to stop seeing the individual chapters as gatekeepers, and let the actual jury itself, who evaluates these things, do that aspect of it. We're trying to get lots of people who have the qualifications we see into the jury as possible. The nomination form is part of the online form. I haven't actually seen the online form this year. They're still catching up with some things, but the nomination form is going to be part of it. You used to have to contact Leah and get one sent out to you, incorporated. The sponsor, as I was saying, they're sort of your collaborator. They act as your liaison with the reference writers. They sort of bug them to get the reference letters in time. Probably the one thing that'll make you lose the most sleep in this whole process is making sure the letter writers are on. There's always one. And some people often ask a spare to be online, at the last minute to see if they can get it. We usually recommend don't go for the most famous possible people because they're the least likely to be uniquely about you, and they're the least likely to get it in on time. Should be somebody who knows you well. We've gone back and forth with the jury on this, whether your sponsor should come from your firm or not. There's always some suspicion that they're just doing it for the marketing value of it. And so it's good to have somebody else do it. On the other hand, they know you. You can really sit down and talk to them and talk about what you want to say and how you're doing things. What makes that bottom line keep going?
It's gonna have to
It's
stay
going to
there.
have to stay there. Okay. So the reference writers, 7 confidential reference writers. The reference writers, you do not see your letters, and so you could have a bad one if you're not good about picking your letter writers. They need to know your work and work well. And they get background information from you and your sponsor. This says from your sponsor, but essentially that's you and your sponsor talking about it. The most important thing is that they don't all say the same thing. You know, you're basically going to come up with a reason you think you're are deserving of fellowship. And that's usually written in a statement and a one-page summary. And that statement usually can't be too big. So you have an overriding goal or explanation of yourself. And then under that overriding explanation is the rest of the summary. Usually that means there's one big statement, 3 sub-statements. Each of those sub-statements is going to have proof that goes with it. And you should probably tell your letter writers why you picked them. So if you teach part-time and you have a student and another faculty, but you're also in practice, they would each have different parts of your summary so that somebody reading these 7 letters, rather than falling asleep hearing the same thing over and over, good person, great designer, or whatever, they actually build a bigger picture of you from those reference letters. The other thing the reference letters do is they prove that you've had impact outside of your own component. There's a real interest in the jury that you have what they call the ripple effect, which means your work spreads out and has influenced other people, whether it's teaching or design or expertise in a specific building type or a specific technology, that you've spoken in other places, that you've written things that might have shown up in other places. And a quick way to do it is to have your reference letters reference how they know you, where they know you, where they're from, so that you can see that you have a broad network. So the network, this isn't necessarily that you've influenced them, but that your network is spread out across the country. So that's a big thing about the letters. And you can say, I'm going to make these 12 points, and you should focus on these 4, or you can focus on these 3. Your sponsor can kind of help them with that. But they need to see the big picture. And that's usually your summary statement, which is your elevator talk, and the other rest of the summary page. I let you advance. I move it every time. So here's our pro tip. These are new, these pro tips now. Connect your letter writers and remove yourself from the process. So you don't need to bug them. Your sponsor they'll learn your sponsor's name. Your undue influence is a bad thing. Goes without saying. Next step. So choosing your object. This often causes a lot of concern for people, and it also is something you can change actually if you submit a second or third time. So we'll go through. I think this goes through the 6 objects. If you look at the objects nowadays, they also have sub-objects because people have become more specialized and they have a bigger, and the people who get the awards sometimes get it primarily in the subspace. And if you're familiar with some of the earlier objects, the sub-objects have been absorbed to it. So you should go with your strongest impacts. You should never, this one thing that's very true about the whole fellowship, it's not about the architect as a generalist. Generally, as a generalist, you don't have as much impact on others and other aspects of the profession. You might be seen as a great designer, something like, but even in the design aspects, you should start focus on it. So if you've been doing religious architecture, and you got this one house you really like, or this one church, or this one hotel you did for some reason, no matter how tempting it is, you need to really build the story of what you're doing in academic architecture or liturgical architecture. And by the time you're applying for your fellowship, you usually have a big enough portfolio and a big enough bibliography of papers or talks or workshops you've done. And you just have to cast away that other stuff and focus on it, and then pick the object in the body of work that works best together. And being in the right object is a big trick. quite frankly, a lot of people go in for design first and move on to something else if they didn't make it the first time. So object one is essentially the old design. Design has grown now to include urban design and preservation. And so we see people focusing heavily on design straight off or urban design or preservation. It doesn't mean you have to do some combination necessarily of all three to get into object one. But the object sentence there has been elaborated on in the last few years. I'm not sure it really helps as much as the sub-objects as to giving you the key as to where you should focus. They do look, this isn't a design jury. So even when you're going in on the design group, you're not looking at the design itself. Do they like it or not like it? Is it their style of design, the jury? They often like seeing peer recognition, things like that. So if you're on a cover or there was an article written about it, that's frequently as good as the object itself. And sometimes when people will show a photograph of a project or something, they'll slip in a little article next to it just to prove that it got peer acceptance or peer recognition. So that's object one, design. Object two is essentially what used to be always called practice. And it has to do with your work in the firm. Obviously, it overlaps with design to a certain extent. Because it was hard to distinguish between the different kinds of practice, they've created two subgenres. One is project management and the other is technical advancement. And these are things you've often done for your firm and then shared at conferences or conventions or writing or things like that with other people in the profession. So it might have been an innovation in how you market. It might have been an innovation in how you manage BIM in your office. And you can imagine how these things have popped up more and more in the last few years. This is always the biggest submission. Until 2 years ago, it also included teaching, research, and writing. And that has now become a sixth object. So that we can clean up this. Even with this new reduction, half the submissions are in this practice and are in this object. Object three is leading the building industry or in the profession and led the institute or led a related organization. My guess is, I don't know this 100%, but it means AIA leadership positions. And this is, after all, an AIA award and honor. So some people go in heavily because they're involved in governance within the AIA. When it talks about the related organizations, they tend to be the one who are most close to the AIA. So it's NCARB or NAB or some of the NOMA, other organizations that are affiliated very closely, because later on there's some objects that are loosely affiliated. Besides just listing your leadership positions, we want to know you did something. What did you undertake? Maybe there was a mentoring program you developed, or you were very heavily involved in the strategic planning process, or things like that. So those things help in related organizations. Usually people in this category were active at their chapter level, then at their state level, then at the national level. And so you got to kind of grab what you did that was at each of those levels and talk about it. It'd be nice if it was the same arena, but it also sometimes you wind up in a new arena when you move to the state level or when you move to the national. So this is advancement of the living standards of people through their improved environment, which kind of focuses more on improving people's situations. But where it really grew out of was working in public service or government or industry. So these are the people who worked for the state government or in the housing department or different things like that. Now, granted, most of these were improving living standards, but there are other industry organizations. They're a little farther away from that, but we're trying to capture people who take a non-typical group and don't go into standard practice, but are still doing things an architect does, whether they're running other projects or they're essentially the client for the architecture profession. 5 is alternative careers, volunteers, and service to society. I'm going to say this is probably this is an important category, and you need to show that your background as an architect has helped you succeed in these other groups. It's the smallest category of people that actually contribute, and it's a tough one because dependent on you to build that bridge between improving society through things that are uniquely your architectural skills. And I should point out that when you do go to the website, there are examples of other people in each of these categories. So for the last 3, I think it's really important to see how they made the pitch, that their work contributes towards society. You gotta make sure it's not just pro bono work for marketing too. And the last one is education, literature, or research. It actually made a point of putting "or" in there because when this category, when it first was described, people seem to think they need to do all of those 3 things. And in the way it minimized their research or their writing if they were trying to do a whole lot of both. So this is a very interesting one. I get a lot of people who don't want to just separate their education work, the teaching that they do from the design work. So that's not a disadvantage. I think most people recognize that so often you're in both fields. You may need to pick one or the other to go in, but that doesn't mean you ignore the teaching you do if you're going in under practice, or the practice you do if you're going in under teaching. You get to show your teaching, your student work, your students' work, but it's good to have your own project work as well. In fact, no matter what you go in for, there's always a section on exhibits, and it's nice to reassure that you're an architect at heart, but you're doing these other things. So those are the 6 optics. The resource center. Okay, so they're reminding you that the website does have these. As you scroll through the new website, it is changed this year. As you scroll through it, you'll eventually at the bottom get to these examples. If we have time, we can go on. So now the anatomy of submission, it's really kind of 3 parts. There's section 1, 2, and 3, and then there's the letters. So you're responsible for the 3 parts up front, and the reference letters are confidential, so they write themselves. Lots of help from you. So, back. So section 1 has 2 things: the sponsor letter and a summary of achievements. And the sponsor letter, a good sponsor letter isn't just an 8th reference letter. It should be a reference letter, it should talk about how fabulous you are, but it also should help lay out the way you've approached the submission. It should mention, it should cover which object you're going in under, why you're good at that object, and how you've laid out if you've done anything unique in the sections beyond. So they're pitching you and they're being a reference. And the summary of achievements is this sort of 1-page thing, and the little summary statement at the top. This is usually prose. I don't want to say that 100%, but the summary talks in prose. Some people talk about, working with a parent when they were 12, a summer job when they were in high school, things like that. They grow it, why they're interested in this particular field or practice or technology. So that's all kind of a prose approach. There's something, I think there's a 40-page limit. I forget now, but I think we've settled on a 40-page limit. So this could be 1 page, it could be more if you're really feeling literate. Whereas section 2, which starts to list your significant work and the awards and things like that. It's more like a list. It's more like a bio. And it helps actually to have the two be different, I feel, because otherwise you sit there, you turn the page, and think, didn't I just go through a bio? If they both list form, if they're both, as a resume form. And then the third one is the exhibits, which are predominantly the photographs, but diagrams, pictures of you giving a speech, working with a bunch of third graders, lecturing to some young architects, all those kinds of things are all part of that section. And so depending which object you are, you may have more pictures of you doing things, or you may have more pictures of your projects. So there's stuff that the jury doesn't get that's part of the form that you just need to do. And when they first get your submission, they quick look through and see if you're disqualified because you didn't sign the code of ethics, you didn't have image credits or things like that. So you got to make sure that this part is there. They need a headshot because they're eventually going to paraphrase your summary statement and use your picture if you win. So make it a good picture. But anyway, the jury doesn't see it. You see it when they announce everything. So the sponsor letter, this now is going to summarize. I apologize if I said some of this already. Sponsor's letter is a big deal about why they believe you're qualified. It's high level narrative and the summary statements. And it's got your summary statement usually at the top or a bigger type or pulled out. And it's very important usually that it acts as an outline for your summary statement, and then the summary statement acts as an outline for your summary page, and that outlines your whole submission. So you follow through with that. This is a curious little, the sponsor letter is the first page, but it's helpful to write it last and review it after the portfolio is complete. That may be true. The one difference I take with this sponsor tip is you really need to give the reference letter writers your sponsor's summary, your short one, the letter, and the short summary statement and the summary, so that they see in maybe just 2 pages what you're doing here. And then you can change it. They're not the wiser. You can't change it and undercut them without telling them. But you can continue to refine the sponsor letter, and refine the summary page. But you got to get those 2 things early. And they actually help you clear up your mind about what you're actually doing. What's the best way to make this statement? In section 2, this is the broad impact. This is where they convince you should brag. You shouldn't use marketing material. You should talk about yourself. This is not one of those places where you're really generous to the rest of your team, but you need to speak specifically about yourself. There's room here for a little shining your contributions, but you really want to make this about you. I don't think